being a student of language, like you said, you're speaking to the core of me on that, and we talk to doctors and they're like, they use the word provider. And I said, did you go to medical school to be called a provider? And they're like, you know what? I'm a doctor. I'm a physician, right? You also like to draw the line in the sand, the difference between a broker and an advisor. And you kind of teed us up into that segment of the show. Give us a little bit of background on why you don't call yourself a broker and that you much rather be called an advisor in what you do.
Yeah, this is an extremely intentional point. It perhaps could be the point I'm most passionate about in the work that we do. I know that you had Carl Schuessler on the show probably a few months ago, and he sort of made this distinction very, very vibrant for you. And I wanted to take a moment to expound upon that a little bit. I have a deep understanding of the identity of a broker because of my other job. I've worked at a think tank in DC called the Institute for the Fiduciary Standard for about 5 years. And we are an advocacy or nonprofit organization that basically advocates for why the differences between a financial broker who works at a brokerage firm and an investment advisor who helps manage financial planning, why that distinction is so important. And so I actually came to Wincline with that background. That was one of the things that I brought to the table. And I really helped John, the CEO of my company. He already knew the difference between a broker and advisor, having made the transition himself, but really pushing him to the next level of challenging him to understand why he should call himself a fee-only benefits advisor rather than fee-based. So that's a slightly parallel argument. I won't get into it now, but there's a distinction there.
Sure.
Here's what I would say to answer your question. Brokers are people who help broker transactions. They are responsible for executing transactions on behalf of the clients that they serve. They help address an information gap between the buyer and the seller in a transaction. And we commonly understand this role in real estate and to a lesser extent in finance, I would say, although I think people are far more aware of it than they are in benefits. I can make that comparison having spent 3 or 4 years in both industries at the same time. A broker also, you could consider your car salesman a broker, right? He's brokering the deal between you and the car dealership. And there's this expectation that when you walk onto the car lot, this guy or this woman who's smiling at you with the greatest beam in the world, they're there to make a sale. So your guard's up, you know what's going on. That could not be more different from the role of a trusted advisor, somebody who you pay directly to represent your interests and your interests alone. There are different standards of ethics that are applied to brokers and financial advisors in the investment world. Brokers have a suitability standard where the recommendations they make to clients, they only have to prove that it's suitable for the client. Whereas for an investment advisor, they have to hold themselves to a fiduciary standard of care, meaning that they can only make recommendations and give advice in the client's best interest solely. And so there is this much higher standard of you can only work for your clients. We see this standard in medicine with a doctor, right? A doctor is not supposed to prescribe a medication because he or she gets a kickback. They're supposed to provide medical advice to a patient solely based on the patient's interest. I know that there are examples where that doesn't hold. Of course, there are always exceptions, but that's the role. That's what you would want your doctor to do. Same thing with a lawyer. You never want to think that your lawyer is giving you advice because they have a conflict of interest somewhere else. That's not supposed to be in that profession. And I would argue that the same exact thing should be in the benefits advisory profession. And this is something that we are very passionate about advocating for at Wincline. We think that it really is at the heart of how we do business. In my view, and John is sort of, my boss has said this and articulated this perfectly, and I really see a lot of value in it. He believes that we couldn't do the work that we do without that type of relationship with our clients. Mm-hmm. The fact that we only accept fees from our clients means that we can ask extremely difficult questions about how to set up parts of a self-funded health plan that other brokers will never even arrive to those questions because of the way that they are compensated. For instance, I'll give you an example. Reinsurance, stop loss for self-funded employers, basically an insurance policy to make sure that you don't incur a whole bunch of claims in a given year. Brokers are compensated off a percentage of that premium, of the stop loss premium, insurance premium. And so when we go in and we say, this stop loss policy that you guys had in place makes no sense, you're way overinsured. And by the way, there are a couple of features that you could add to your health plan that would basically save you about 50 or so grand a year at virtually no risk to you whatsoever if you really break down the mechanics of it. We're capable of doing that because it doesn't matter to us which stop loss policy they place, right? We get a direct fee from them based only off the value we provide to them in that advising relationship. And so I think like that's one example. There are probably a dozen that we could talk about if we had more time, but that is at the heart of how we do business. So that's what I would say. The difference can't, it's almost as big as the difference between care and insurance to me. It's massive, and it's not well understood. And so part of, in my No Do Gap paper that we were discussing about, that's one of the sections that I talked about the difference there. This is a no-do gap that we need to start helping people cross.